All right.
What's going on
Oh, you should put it on there.
my backup phone. This is the other one. This is not my usual phone.
All right. You're on, everyone. Shalom, everyone. Chag Simak Rosh Kadash, which means joyful new month. I hope everyone's having a great new month, new moon today. So today is a new moon day for us. And it's actually the start of our 13th month this year. For those of us that keep the calendar in this fellowship, we will be doing a we are observing now technically a 13th month because with Yahuwah's calendar, the way it is that you have to have the new moon, the first of Abib, follow the vernal equinox, or also known as better known as the equilux, more accurately. If so, basically, because this month's new moon, the reason it wasn't just 12 months this year was because the new moon happened a couple of days right now before we get the equilux. So we have to wait for extra new moon. So just to explain, because I know there's other people out there that already started their new year, we don't start ours until next month. So we will be having a Beeb one for our fellowship around somewhere in early April, it would seem, or second week of April, it would seem. So just to explain all that, get that out of the way, because I know there's people that have been asking me my viewpoint, opinion about this whole, you know, starting the new year, as early as late February. I personally disagree, and for those of you out there that have been following this ministry for the past 5 to 7 years, all of us disagree on that. So I don't need to rehash that for those of you that have followed us. If now today's not about that, so what I would like to say is if you want to know why we don't believe in that, I recommend why we don't observe green ears of grain and why we don't start the new year where, with all due respect, even the original secular calendars show that February was still the last month of the previous year was always the 12th month of the year. Um, if you want to know why we don't acknowledge the new year as early as February, I recommend you checking out our study called The Biblical New Year, which is on this YouTube page. I recommend you check that out. But, as far as the understanding Yahuwah, the Most High, Yahusha HaMashiach, Yahusha the Messiah has given us, there's no way we believe in our respective opinion. There's no way you're going to get a new year when it's still winter. And that's just the way it goes. That's the way that the Hebrews always kept it. They always had the new year. You can check this out historically. The Hebrews always kept the new year, whether in March or April. They would have never had a new year when things are not even growing yet. Okay, they're not. You can, again, and I understand that weather is subjective. A brother of mine recently corrected me on that. Weather is subjective. But what's not subjective is the fact that historically, even in the Roman calendar before the Julian calendar, February was always the last month of the previous year, not the first month of the new year. So, anyway, but I could understand the argument that weather is subjective and we can't use weather as an argument. But anyway, end of all that. So, sorry for the long spiel here, but just so our brothers and sisters out there know our viewpoint and don't have to rehash a lot of things here. Okay. Let me just see here and let me pull this up here for you guys. I don't have Google Docs installed on the device I'm using right now. So what I'm gonna have to use one of my other devices here in front of me to kind of go through these cross references. And don't worry, I will be giving you guys the actual doc in the description like I always do. For whatever reason, this device wasn't today. What are you doing? Bro, wake up. This thing's acting retarded. Never seen this before in my lifetime. Why are you doing this? Get out of here. What is going on here, bro? Start this device is acting stupid. Okay. Yeah. Hold on a second. All right, so wait, that's right now. I'm on me right here. So we're gonna go into this Google Docs. This is gonna be a part 5 of areas that the Targums, the Samaritan Pentateuch, the Peshitta, and the Vulgate agree with the Septuagint. Oh, also Dead Sea Scrolls. Even though we're not really going to be dealing with the Dead Sea Scrolls today because I don't have them in front of me. So, but anyway, so what I want to do here first is to start part 5. We're going to be going into Leviticus 14, verse 57, where the Masoretic text leaves out the word day here. And you're going to see how this is, how it's important that you should have the word day in there. I'll just give you an example here. We'll start with the Septuagint here. Leviticus 14:57, and of the declaring in what day he is clean, unclean, and what day it shall be purged. This is the law of the leprosy. So, about the word day there, you'll see your Bible will read as to teach when it is unclean and when it is clean. This is the law of leprosy. The problem I have with that is that you're not always going to be dealing with leprosy. It's not a constant condition. And when you take the word day out of the text, it doesn't make any sense. So the Septuagint and the Targum Onkelos read it as to teach on what day it is unclean and on what day it is purified. This is the law for the leprosy. Way more sense. When you have the word day there, it gives you the context. So I know a lot of people say, oh, Doug, that's, you're grasping for straws now. You're talking about one word. Yeah, one word can make the difference in a verse. You start taking things out like that, it can make a difference. Okay. The next verse we have is Leviticus 16:20. So staying in Leviticus here. Leviticus 16:20. Okay, so it says here, and when he has completed to atone for the set apart place, for the tabernacle of ordinance, and for the altar, then shall he bring the living goat. Okay, so let's see here. Okay. Trying to see why I listed this one here. Oh, cleansing. That's why. Okay. There seems to be they omit the word cleansing in the Masoretic text because it says, and he shall make a cleansing for the priest and shall bring the living goat. So you have the Septuagint say cleansing at the end there. And let's go to the Vulgate as well. And he has cleansed the set apart place and the tabernacle and the altar, and then let him offer the living goat. Okay, so it could just be a difference of words, but when you look at the Septuagint here, it seems to be a part of the verse missing. It says, "He shall finish making atonement for the set apart place, for the tabernacle witness, and for the altar, and he shall make a cleansing of the priests and bring the living goat." So actually, what's missing here is the mentioning of making atonement for the set apart place and for the tabernacle, and for the altar. That seems to be actually the part that's missing. Yeah. And also, it's weird that the word cleansing at the end is nowhere to be mentioned in the other versions. You only have it in the first part of the verse. Um, so actually, I would have to take that Leviticus 16:20 off, only because the Septuagint is the only one that has that in it, the word cleansing at the end there. So we'll just move on here. All right, so we do have, though, Leviticus 17:24 here. The Masoretic seems to be missing half of the verse here in Leviticus 17, verse 4, and it says, "And bring it not to the door of the tabernacle of ordinance, that it may be offered an oblation in the presence of Yahuwah before the tabernacle of Yahuwah." Okay, my bad. I'm reading from the wrong version here. My bad. All right, so the LXX has extra paragraph, as well as a Samaritan Pentateuch for this command about how you're supposed to offer these sacrifices at the tabernacle. It says, "And shall not bring it to the door of the tabernacle witness, so as to sacrifice it for a whole burnt offering or a peace offering to you, who it to be acceptable for a sweet smelling savor. And whosoever shall slay it outside, and shall not bring it to the door of the tabernacle witness, so as to offer it as a gift to Yahuwah before the tabernacle of Yahuwah, blood shall be imputed to that man. He has shed blood, that the soul shall be cut off from his people." Now, what it looks like is that the Masoretic is missing the first paragraph of that. What the Masoretic has is the last part, where it just says it says, whosoever will slay it outside. So there seems to be a huge paragraph in the beginning where it says, "You shall not bring to the door tabernacle witness, so as to sacrifice it for a whole burnt offering or peace offering to Yahuwah, to be acceptable for a sweet smelling savor." That part seems to be missing from the Masoretic, and please someone correct me if I'm wrong, but the Masoretic is definitely missing like half of that verse. Um, yeah, and so the Samaritan Pentateuch has that as well. And just to double check for the Masoretic, it only has, "Bring it not unto the door of the tabernacle congregation to offer an offering unto Yahuwah before the tabernacle of Yahuwah. Blood shall be imputed unto that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people." So the Masoretic version omits half of that verse and doesn't give you the explanation why he's about to be killed, because he offered it outside the temple, and he offered it. He did not bring it into the temple. That's why, or the tabernacle. That's why he's being killed. But the Masoretic doesn't tell you that. It just says, literally, it omits half of the verse. It says, "Bring it not into the door tabernacle of the congregation to offer an offering to Yahuwah before the tabernacle of Yahuwah. Blood shall be imputed." Why is blood being imputed? It doesn't explain why. But the Samaritan Pentateuch of that same verse in Leviticus 17:4 and the Septuagint give you the explanation of that. So anyway, that's just a perfect example there of certain things that should not be omitted. Anyway, next one. Mom, would you like to read Genesis 35, verse 8?
Sure.
Let's see here.
Okay. Okay. Now, Deborah, Rebecca's nurse, died and was buried under the oak below Bethel. So it was named Alian Bakut.
Okay. So it was named Alian Bakut.
Northwest Mesopotamia, my footnote says.
Yep.
Where that was.
Now, for those of us that don't know the Hebrew language, what does that mean? Now, thankfully, the Septuagint and the Vulgate decided to give you the meaning of that place rather than transliterate the name. So it says here in the LXX, says she was buried below Bethel under the oak, and Yakub called its name the Oak of Mourning. That's what it means, the Oak of Mourning. The Vulgate as well, the Oak of Weeping. So we see that the Vulgate and the Septuagint, probably because their audience does not know Hebrew like the back of their hand, like the Israelites do. Okay, they're not going to give you a Hebrew name that they would not know whatsoever it means. So obviously, the common sense thing to do is you translate it, but you give the meaning rather than the name of the place, because the name of the place is not going to tell you what it means. So most likely that's why the Vulgate did that. That's why the Septuagint did that. And I know a lot of people will just say, well, isn't the Vulgate the Septuagint translated in Latin? Not exactly. So the Vulgate actually uses a Hebrew manuscript that precedes by good, I would say, 600-700 years, the Masoretic text. So it's a much earlier Hebrew, and it agrees with the Septuagint in certain areas, like that area. So obviously, it shows that in the prior Hebrew manuscripts, they were trying to give more of a thought for thought type of manuscript rather than transliterate. Because for the common people that don't know Hebrew, what good is that going to do? Oh, okay, Bakuth or whatever that name is. They wouldn't know what that means, especially for the community coming back from Babylon. They're not going to know Hebrew. So, again, it was necessary for them to start doing thought for thought types of translations. And no, that's not adding to or taking away from Scripture. If you give the meaning rather than the word or the name, it's still the same thing. It's just they're giving you a definition type of translation. Anyway, so we have many Bibles today are actually thought for thought Bibles that people don't realize. The Bible my mom likes to use a lot, the NIV. If you look it up, it's thought for thought. It's a paraphrase type of Bible. New Living Translation, thought for thought. Okay, so the Septuagint, you could say, influenced what we have today as paraphrase Bibles. And was a big influence. Now, am I saying every verse is a paraphrase? No, I'm not saying that. But the way the translators did the Septuagint, many times where you compare to the later Hebrew, they really didn't like to transliterate. They liked to give the reader the meaning of the word and what the verse is actually trying to say. Anyway. So Genesis 35, verse 9. very next verse here. We have it saying, and Alua appeared again to Yaqub after he returned from Mesopotamia of Syria and beruked him. So we see both the Vulgate and the Septuagint, Mesopotamia of Syria. Okay, so that's self-explanatory there. Now the Masoretic has Padan Aram, and again, it really could be the same place. It's just that the Septuagint is taking a definition or possibly even modernizing the terminology for the geography of their day. Mind you, the geography of their day would have been, 300 BC, Alexandrian Egypt, a very, Greco-Roman type of world at that time. Alexander the Great pretty much conquered almost the whole world. So you got to understand from their point of view, they're going to use geography that relates to their day. Now, Padan Aram possibly could have been the original Hebrew, possibly term of that place. But if you're translating it for a Greek people, okay, they're not going to know what Padan Aram is, most likely. Macedonians are not going to know that. And even their communities in Egypt, like I said, they spoke a lot of Greek and a lot of Aramaic. They did not know Hebrew terminology anymore. They did not know Hebrew names of places. So the Septuagint is going to give you a Greek translation of that place. And the Vulgate follows that, which, by the way, is kind of interesting because the Vulgate, like I said, is translated from a Hebrew text, not a Greek text, and is still being called Mesopotamia of Syria. So, again, those are like minor differences, but you see that that there's a reason. There seems to be a reason why there's so many differences there. Possibly the Masoretes, when they made the Masoretic text, they felt the need that, well, we got to keep it authentic. We got to put back the Hebrew name of the place, yada, yada, yada. So, anyway, verse 26 is the same thing. I don't think we need to rehash that. It's the same thing. We'll say Mesopotamia of Syria in the LXX and the Vulgate in 35, verse 26. Now we're going to chapter 41 of Genesis. And it says in 41, verse 21 of Genesis, giving no indication of being full, they remained in the same state of emaciation and squalor, whatever that means, awakening, but being weighed down into sleep again. The Vulgate and the Septuagint give the indication that Yaqub would have woke up and then went back to sleep. Now, for whatever reason, the Masoretic text, contrary to the Vulgate and the Septuagint, just say, I awoke. It does not mention him going back to sleep. So that's a minor difference, but it's still a difference, and it's still them taking away from the word and trying to omit something from Yahuwah's word. Okay. Genesis 42:19. Here's another thing the Vulgate and the Septuagint have in common here. So Genesis 42:19. If you be peaceable, let one of your brothers be detained in prison, but go you and carry back the grain you have purchased. Right? Okay. Same thing with the Vulgate. Carry that you have bought to your houses. There's no mention of a famine, interestingly. There's no need to mention of a famine because it's already talking about a famine in the previous chapters. The Masoretic text felt the need to add in the famine of your houses. So they feel the need to add in the words the famine. is that really necessary when you have the previous chapters and verses talking about a famine? Not really. And that's kind of what I would call a unnecessary addition to the text. Which again, Yahuwah says, "Do not add, do not take away." Okay. A lot of these times, these rabbis felt like the reader was an idiot or something. They needed to like put like add context into every verse, which is kind of ridiculous in my personal opinion. You don't need to add words for context when the context is in the chapter and the previous chapters. But anyway, Leviticus 23:11. So we're going to go to that. I'm going to show you this. Now, this is one of the bigger differences. This is where this affects, speaking of the calendar here, um, okay, this is where it becomes an issue. And I know a lot of people say, well, Doug, how do you know which Sabbath it is? We're going to get into that. So when you go to the Masoretic text, this is one of the major issues and pet peeves I have with the Masoretic. It just says, after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. The day after the Sabbath. Which Sabbath? This is the week of unleavened bread. Which Sabbath is it talking about? So there is ambiguity in the Masoretic version. This is the problem I have with Leviticus 23:11 in the Masoretic. You go to the Septuagint. The Septuagint, again, gives you the meaning. It's not going to give you transliteration. Okay, it's going to give you the definition of what the Hebrew is saying. Okay, so it says, and he shall lift up the sheaf before Yahuwah to be accepted for you on the day or on the morrow of the first day. The priest shall lift it up. So what is it saying? It's saying the morrow of the first day. What is the first day referring to? It's not referring to the first day of the week. I know some people are going to say that. If you interpret it that way, then that means you would have to do your count on like basically a Monday, which that's obviously that's not what it's saying in context. Okay, it's talking about the first day of unleavened bread. It's saying the day after the first day of unleavened bread, the day after the high day, the high Sabbath. It's the day after the high Sabbath you start your 50-day count. Okay, Leviticus 23:11 in the Septuagint. Now, do we have second and third witnesses for those? Yes, we do. Targum Onkelos, this is how it reads. He shall lift up the Omer before Yahuwah to be accepted for you after the day of the festivity. Is a weekly Sabbath a festival?
No.
No, right? It's not a feast day. So the Sabbath that's being mentioned, it can't be a regular Sabbath then, right? If it's calling it a day, the day after the festival. Okay.
Right.
So it's talking about a high Sabbath, the first day of unleavened bread. It's talking about the day after the first day of unleavened bread, which, by the way, that's what the Septuagint is saying in context in that verse. And just to give you a third witness that's not talking about the weekly Sabbath, Pseudo Jonathan Targum in the same verse reads, on the morrow after the first feast day of Passover, you are to uplift the wave offering or the sheaf. Okay, so the Pseudo Jonathan Targum even paraphrases even more and says that Sabbath that's being referenced is the first feast day of Pascha, the first feast day of the week of Passover. I think all of us would agree, even though Yahuwah never called the week of unleavened bread Passover, their culture at that time, post-Babylonian captivity, they just started calling the whole week Passover. So when it's saying the first feast day of Pascha, it's saying the first feast day of unleavened bread, essentially. And all of us would agree that is talking about the 15th of Abib. So even the Pseudo Jonathan Targum is telling you it's the day after the first day of unleavened bread. So all three versions agree. The one that's kind of, I'm looking for the saying I'm looking for, the kind of the one that's out of the bunch that is giving really no context is the Masoretic text in that verse. Okay. Now, the last cross reference we have for today, we're going to go with Jeremiah 11:19. This is, I believe, one of the bigger differences where the Vulgate agrees with the Septuagint in the messianic prophecies here, and where this is a big deal. Jeremiah 11:19. We'll start with the Septuagint here. It says, "But I, as an innocent lamb led to the slaughter, knew not." Against me they devise an evil device, saying, come, let us put wood into his bread, and let us destroy him from off of the land of the living, and let his name not be remembered anymore. So what's the big deal there? Let us put wood into his bread. All of you guys should have a light bulb going on in your head. What is this talking about? It's talking about the impalement, the crucifixion. This is verbatimly talking about that. And the Vulgate agrees. The Vulgate has it worded almost identical. And I was like a meek lamb who, I'm reading from the Catholic public domain version here, so it's going to be a little modern. And I was like a meek lamb who is being carried to be a victim, so even like a sacrifice. Okay, and I did not realize that they had devised plans against me, saying, "Let us place wood upon his bread." Now, it's interesting is it says upon his bread. I mean, it's still technically the same thing. And let us eradicate him from the land of the living. Let his name no longer be remembered. Now, the Masoretic changes that. Let us put wood into his bread to destroy the tree with its fruit. A lot of people will say that's not a big deal. I can still see it being Yahusha. I would argue that it's that change makes it so generalized that most Jewish people today, if they read the book of Jeremiah in that verse, they would not get Yahusha there. They would not even think about the crucifixion in their version. It just says destroy the tree with its fruit. A tree allegorically in scripture can just mean any person. It's not going to automatically point to Yahusha. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like even from yours, Mom, like would you get automatically, like other than knowing that he's the lamb, if you just look at the phrase destroy the tree with its fruit, does that automatically point to Yahusha technically? No, it doesn't. So that's kind of the point. Now, I get it. I get the first half of the verse obviously points to him. But the part of the verse we're talking about is destroy the tree with its fruit. Okay. Well, a tree allegorically is a person. Okay. So it could be any, it's really just saying destroy the person with its works. Allegorically is what it's saying. That can be anyone. But put wood into his bread, that's clearly talking about Yahusha. And that's a huge difference to change. Huge difference. So the Vulgate, by the way, sides with the Septuagint version of that verse. So it's showing that a much earlier Hebrew manuscript that Jerome used to translate into the Vulgate is siding with the Septuagint. So to explain what I mean is you could look this up for yourself. Most people out there that try to figure out what Hebrew source Jerome had, the consensus is that this Hebrew manuscript he used to translate into Latin would have been only a little bit younger than the Septuagint, which means that there are going to be things in the Vulgate that agree with the Septuagint because it's based on a much earlier Hebrew manuscript, just like the Septuagint is. The Septuagint was based on, translated from basically the original Paleo-Hebrew scriptures. The Vulgate was translated most likely from a copy of that source. So most likely you had a later copy that Jerome had from the 1st to 3rd century. So it's showing that just in a couple centuries, something's going on. They're changing Yahuwah's word, or I should say, modern copies of his original word that's in heaven. Okay? they're trying to change manuscripts. They're trying to change words and all that. But anyway, so that's pretty much the end of this part 5. I didn't want to put too many cross references in one video. So hopefully this was very edifying to you guys. And really the point of this study is to show why it's important to know what source that your Bibles are being translated from. It's important to know what type of Bible you're using and you're studying. And really, this is to expose the idea that, that all Bibles are the same, or that the King James is perfect, or that one Bible is perfect. This is proof in the pudding, as the saying goes, that you need to study from multiple sources. You need to study from multiple translations and manuscripts to get to the truth, because ultimately Yahuwah has never promised that his word, not even his word, because his word's in heaven. He promised that his word, the original word, the person Yahusha, would be preserved in heaven. That's the verse people love to use in Psalms. It says, your word is tried, and it talks about preserved, but it's talking about in heaven. It will last forever in heaven. That's not a Bible. Okay? Bibles are copies of that. Bibles are physical written down copies of Yahuwah's verbiage that he spoke to mankind. That's what a Bible is. It's a copy. Even the original manuscript, the Torah of Masha, was a first-hand copy. Okay? So this is what we need to understand. What we have today as a Bible is like a 20th, let's play the game telephone, right? Okay, so you got the Torah of Masha all the way at the beginning, right? This, just to use this as an example, this is about 20 chairs down, okay? This is about 20, 30 chairs down from the original, whoever is at the beginning of the line of the game telephone. This would be at all the way at the end. Now, the Septuagint, to give you a visual, instead of this being all the way at the end, because the Masoretic is the most modern version of the Old Testament we have, this would be about maybe 2-3 chairs down, okay? Huge difference. Even when you're talking about the game of telephone, okay? Huge difference. You got the second or third chair where, you whisper into someone's ear, they whisper back, is that type of thing. Mm-hmm. The problem is this, the source from this, not that the translation of this is horrible, but the source of the translation is about 20, 30 people whispering down. Mm-hmm. So eventually things get lost in translation. Things get lost when they get recopied. Eventually, you're going to have people at some point in time too that have nefarious agendas when you're that far down in the game of telephone that might want to change the message too. That might not be honest with recopying things and making their own manuscript of an earlier manuscript. So again, that's the concept. But this study is to show people that we don't have to be content with these modern translations and stuff like that of the Masoretic. Yahuwah has preserved to a certain extent. He has given us much earlier sources, modern translations of much earlier sources. Whether you talk about the Septuagint, whether you talk about the Targums, whether you talk about the Samaritan Torah, whether you talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, all of those compared to the Masoretic, that's all the way at the end of the line, are a lot closer to the original source. And that's really should be our goal. Get to the original source. So we get to the purest form possible that Yahuwah has preserved for us of his word. The closest to the purest form. Okay? That should be the goal. So hopefully that visual I just showed you guys on camera explains the purpose of this study. And it's also to show people that the a lot of the so-called contradictions that these atheists want to pull out of the hat, they're basing a lot of these so-called, air quotes here, contradictions in the Bible, they're basing on one Bible. Well, how many atheists will use this Septuagint and say there's contradictions? How many atheists will use the Dead Sea Scrolls and say there's so many contradictions? Why do they use the King James Bible? Because the manuscript for the King James Old Testament is so modern, it didn't even exist until almost the Middle Ages. And they know that. That's why they usually will point to your King James Bible or whatever Bible you have. They'll never mention, or they'll never even want to talk about prior older Bibles. They never want to do that. But anyway, so hopefully this was edifying to all of our brothers and sisters out there. Have a great rest of Yahuwah's New Moon Day, and shalom, everyone. Have a great 13th